Hello. Hello, Booktube slash readers on YouTube. I'm almost 28 years old, so it feels a bit odd to refer to myself as someone who's on Booktube, but introducing a new member of the geriatric Booktube community. Hello, my name is Emily. I have been a longtime reader and Booktube lurker, and really, this morning I was just watching Read with Cindy's video, and it just made me think of her talking about how you don't have to be perfect to start Booktube, you should just do the dang thing. So I'm sitting here literally filming this with my phone propped up on a copy of Abby Jacobson's memoir, because, women propping up other women to do their thing. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about the book Delirium by Lauren Oliver. I don't know exactly what made me want to read this book. I recently reread, I've been rereading some like early 2000s, mid 2000s YA dystopian fantasy, and it really kind of just got me thinking about who I was during that time period and just like what YA trends were during that time period. Delirium was published in 2011. I believe this is Lauren Oliver's second book. Before I read Delirium, I had read Before I Fall, which I did enjoy. It was sort of the melodramatic teen story that, I like to guilty watch, like on Riverdale or Pretty Little Liars, that kind of thing. And so this really made me think a lot of like the Neil Shusterman books, like Pretties, Uglies. You know how like that era of YA, it was all like at least a trilogy or a series, and they all just had like mysterious one word titles that all related to each other, like, Pretties, Uglies, Specials, like any of those people were, actually gonna hang out or have their own table in your high school cafeteria. So I picked up Delirium from Half Price Books, and one of the things, I was just having like a really crappy day and just like needed some, a consumerist jolts to my system to make me feel better. And it was funny because I've actually seen Lauren Oliver in person. I've gone to an author book talk at a local bookstore and seen her on a book panel, and didn't get to have anything signed by her because I didn't have any of her books at the time. But when I opened this copy, it's been signed by her, and it was signed to someone named Emily. So, coincidence? Yes, coincidence, but one that made me feel special that day. Thoughts on this book? It's not bad nor good. I think that what I'm gonna continue to find when I revisit like these the YA books that were written to be dystopian books in the early to mid 2000s and early 2010s is just that I'm a different person now, and I think a lot of us are different people now reading them. I've evolved a lot as a person and as a reader. I'm a much more, when something is selling itself as a dystopian book, I'm a lot more critical about the ways that it makes itself a dystopian story. In Delirium, the basic premise is that there, in some, it's very vague about how long this sort of like apocalyptic event where the government took over the United States happened, but it follows a main character named Elena, which is short for Magdalena, who lives in Portland in a time period when the United States government has completely created martial law and completely changed the rules of society, and has created basically city encampments where there are electrified fence borders, there are regulators that have, from what I can understand, complete freedom to just do whatever the hell they want, roam the streets, raid whoever. And the reason why this was able to happen and why these cities continue to exist is that basically everyone's been lobotomized. They just refer to it as the procedure, but essentially everyone's poked through the temple, and talked about how you can tell when someone's had the procedure just by looking at them. One, because you can see the marking on their temple, and people show it off. People get undercuts, the way queer people signal to each other hey, DTF, look at my undercut. They do that in this society to show that they have had the procedure and they are no longer at risk of being infected. And in this society, being infected, you can delirium kind of hints at it, but they've labeled love as a disease, one that affects your nervous system, one that makes you unsteady, unstable, passionate, angry, basically at risk for experiencing emotions that would make you a prime candidate to lead resistance against the government, or just have a feeling that makes you a human. So basically the procedure turns everyone into cattle, essentially, or robots, robotic cattle. And the government determines everything about your life. They determine who you marry, they determine how many children you'll have, they determine what your salary will be, what your job will be, where you live. And everyone is just happy to do it because, one, they've had the procedure, and two, the procedure promises happiness. It promises that you will never be in pain and that you will never have to experience fear or discomfort ever again. People have so bought into this lie that love is a disease that they're willing to just go along with that. People receive the procedure at age 18. So Lena, the main character, is approaching her 18th birthday where she'll get the procedure. And, kind of spoiler free, she has some family background stuff that makes her extremely invested in upholding the government's, what the government says about the procedure and about love. She is the model teenager. She never breaks a rule, never breaks curfew, is all about preparing for her tests that lead up to the procedure so that she can become a perfect match, a perfect wife, a perfect citizen. And long story short, she meets someone who kind of turns her world upside down and causes her to start to question everything she's been told about her mother, the government, what her life should be like. I felt very similarly to this book as I did Unwind by Neil Shusterman, which is another one that I read. Papercut Book Club, Cindy and Kat and some other booktubers discussed this book as part of their book club, and it was one of the things that kind of inspired me to start rereading YA dystopian fiction from this era, where the concept is really interesting, but the ability to actually critically flesh out all of the different systems and forms of oppression and war and social systems that we're very familiar with today, heteropatriarchy and racial oppression and environmental justice and access to healthcare being different. I think that our understanding, our collective societal understanding of those things was different, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and the way that authors wrote about them and explored them in their books was different, especially in YA, because I think the idea of YA being simplistic or, dumbed down compared to adult fiction created a lot of problems for that era of books and for Delirium in particular. So the world itself doesn't make a lot of sense. The government, like how the world came to be, doesn't make a lot of sense. We really just get like a short glimmer from Lena telling it from her perspective at the beginning of the story, but we don't really get a lot else about like you know how this world can exist the way it does without any kind of massive uprising, and why so many people are so thoroughly bought into the lie that love is dangerous, even though throughout the books we see people experiencing love, and we see people having a wider variety of human emotions but not really questioning it very much. So I think that was one of the things about the book that I really struggled with. The other thing is that like Lena is just not, it's just kind of hard to give a shit about her. Like she's just not a very interesting person. Like kind of her entire personality can be summed up by trauma and running. She's just like such a stick in the mud, like kind of like how Hermione would have been if she hadn't had such a like strong sense of justice and doing what's right, and like fallen in with like the dopes that are Harry and Ron getting her into trouble, but just so invested in kind of like following the rules, especially at the beginning, or like resistant to the idea of having any kind of personality that could put her in danger of not receiving the procedure or being seen as suspicious, because there's a lot to do with her mother, and why she lives with her aunt and her uncle that sort of tie into that. So it's like it's understandable, but at the same time she's just so flat for most of the book. And then it's like romance between her and the character Alex, who is really the person that sparks her to start to question things and changes the trajectory of how her life goes. It's not exactly insta-lovey. It's kind of like it's sort of insta enemies to lovers type of thing. Like they meet, she really doesn't like him at first. He's dangerous, mysterious. She doesn't understand who he is, where he comes from, what he wants. And there's just like this one moment that, she experiences chemistry, love for the first time, and it kind of just changes everything. And, one thing I do have to give Lauren Oliver is I do think that she's, for like slightly melodramatic YA, where you're really kind of just like focusing on, the ooey gooey romance, I do think that she writes, like she has a compelling way of writing teenagers that like makes them seem like in love, makes them seem like fully fleshed out characters. But it's like in other aspects of the character, I don't see the same fullness. I don't see the same nuance, like just like her personality. I'm like, her personality is more than just like being a runner and having a crush on this guy and having a like manic pixie dream girl best friend, like her best friend is like Blake Lively from the Sisterhood of Traveling Pants. Like her best friend is what makes her have a personality in the book. And that's just kind of a pet peeve, I guess, of mine. Like I just don't, it's really hard for me to get behind main characters, especially who sort of like rely on everyone else around them to be fleshing them out as a person and to be driving their motivation and action and relationships. So that's just kind of a gripe that I had about, Lena in general. The book itself just like isn't really, like there's a twist in it that it's not that you see it coming, because you don't necessarily see it coming, but we haven't gotten enough backstory about the parties involved in the twist to really make you care about the twist, or for the twist to be like really interesting and compelling, in my opinion. So again, I think a lot of my same criticisms that I have of Delirium I had of Unwind, of characters just really not being very fleshed out, relationships, like especially romance, kind of feeling a little forced or like coming out of nowhere, and like letting the romance really be the characters' personalities. And like having interesting moments and like interesting dialogue, and like there being moments where the characters really kind of like get into the grit of like, why do we exist? I feel like that's, teenagers like think about that, I think, a lot more than we give them credit for. And like, I definitely know that I was thinking about that as a teen. Like, what am I doing? Is it worth following the rules of this society and being a perfect example of an honorable teen who will become an exemplary adult? Is that really the path of least resistance? Like, is that what will really make me happy? Or is that what will just allow me to avoid discomfort? And I think that's something that a lot of teenagers grapple with, and it's something that really like guides a lot of teenagers and young adults' life choices. Like, people will be proud of me if I do this, and people will celebrate me if I do this, even if it's not what I really want to do, or even if I think that it's wrong. Or, I think that there's like some element of corruption, or by participating in this system, I will be participating in ultimately the destruction of all or part of the human race and our earth, which, sounds dramatic, but it's like, like that stuff feels big, and it can be big when you're really looking at, like the themes in this book of like governmental oppression, and, is it okay to kill people that don't conform, and how far do we have to go to conform, and, where are the limits of our humanity, and like what are we willing to do? How far are we willing to push the limit of our humanity in pursuit of comfort? So that's kind of just like my rambly thoughts about Delirium. And, maybe as I read more of these books from that era, I'll put together a more cohesive analysis or review of that genre, especially, I devoured, like I read a ton of those books in that time, and so it would be really interesting to go back and reread a lot of those series. Kind of veering off, it's doing this for the first time, like I'm definitely not a like natural camera person, but just thinking about what I want to like be looking at moving into October and what I'll be reading. I picked up the Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein from the library per Read with Cindy's recommendations. I've found that we just have very similar taste in books, and are concerned about a lot of the same things. So I'm really excited. I've actually already read the first like 25 pages, and I love me a good like period drama, morally ambiguous. It's got sort of like a Victorian bodice ripper feel to it, but like with like murder and like sociopathy. So I'm into it. I also really I read like everything. That's something that I will definitely be exploring on this channel, is that I read pretty much almost every genre. So when it comes to the library, I love using the library, but I will admit I am often very lazy when it comes to the library. I don't feel like browsing. I don't want to like, it's not predictable the way that bookstores are. Like you kind of know what's in stock. I know you can look it up on like the branch stuff, like if books are there, but I'm usually really lazy when it comes to the library, and I'll like put stuff on hold, and I'll have it delivered to the library closest to my house, and then I'll just pick it up after work or something. Well, so it's very rare that I actually go and just like wander the shelves of the library. Well, this past week I did that, and I'm so glad that I did, because I just moved recently, so the library branch that I live nearby now is different than the one that I've been to in the past, and the one that I went to in the past always had kind of a just like so graphic novel selection. Well, I can say that is not true of my new library branch, and I found not one, not two, but 3 graphic novels that I've been wanting to read for quite a while, and that those are Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. And Mariko Tamaki also was one of the co-writers and creators of This One Summer, which she created with her, I believe, sister, Jillian Tamaki. These two, I expect, this one I've heard is like a little more like melancholy, sad. I mean, still cute, but just like kind of like hits you in the feels bone a little bit more. And Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, I've heard has like some feelsy to it, but is ultimately like really silly and cute and fun. Which, you know, I'm in social work grad school, and like all we do is talk about oppression and like depressing things all day, so lighthearted graphic novels on the weekend are my jam. And then Check Please, which I've actually like skimmed through it before. Check Please is written by Ngozi Ukazu. I actually got to meet her. She came to a comics expo where I live and was tabling the second volume of Check Please had just been released. So I got to meet her. She's delightful and lovely. This is a hockey comic about a boy who loves to bake and is also very, very gay and adorable. And I don't really read. I read a ton of queer literature and you know, LGBTQ media, but I actually don't read a ton of like, you know, men loving men stories. So this will be a little different for me. I read mostly like, I read a lot of like gender fluid, gender queer, trans, lesbian, women loving women literature and media and comics. So I'm excited for this one because look at that face. Oh my god. Like, and that pie. Oh, so cute. So I'm ready for some cuteness, especially after slogging through the dystopian feels on Delirium and other things I've been reading. So it's been a pleasure meeting you all. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I love talking about books. I don't really have anyone in my life who's like a big reader or who reads like the same stuff that I do that we can talk about in the same way. So excited to keep this going. Bye all.